Hello everyone, my name is Serafi and I'm happy to meet you all. And today we're going to be playing Cubics. So Cubic is a deck that's very cheap because all the cards are event cards, level up rewards, or drops. There's not a single card that's in a box. So you can build this deck, guaranteed. It might take you a minute, but you can build it without spending a single gem. So look at the deck and see if you like it. The skill that we're using is called Neutralization. It can be used by revealing 3 Cubic monsters in your hand. Cubic monsters, not Cubic cards. Place 1 Cubic counter on a face-up monster your opponent controls. Monsters with a Cubic counter cannot attack and their effects are negated. Now remember, skills do not start chains. Your opponent could have an effect that could be activated, such as Constellar Pleiades. They cannot respond to you activating the skill. You activate the skill, their monster is negated, they can't do anything about that. This skill can only be used if you begin the duel with a extra deck that contains only Cubic cards. So no back row. Only Cubic back row. No Compulse, no IDP, no Crackdown, no Book of Moon, nothing. Only Cubic cards. The skill can only be used once per turn and twice per duel. So it's an extremely powerful effect. Being able to, without your opponent being able to react, negate one of their monsters forever and prevent it from ever attacking is insane. It's not as insane as before because we have Link monsters now, but still, it shuts your opponent's negates off for the turn. You can play the game. It's really, really good. The drawback hurts a lot, but we do have some key plays that we can make to try and kill our opponent when we go second. For the main deck, we have Crimson Nova, the Dark Cubic Lord. Cannot be normal summoned or set, must be special summoned from your hand by revealing 3 other Cubic cards in your hand with different names. Very important. And cannot be special summoned by other ways. Unaffected by other monsters' activated effects whose original attack is 3,000 or less. Original attack points, not current attack points. That means, for example, if your opponent summons Ultimate Leo Utopia Ray, equips a monster, and now it has 5,500 attack points. If it tries to target Crimson Nova to have its attack points and negate its effect, that won't work. When this attacking card destroys a monster by battle, you can activate this effect. This card can make a second attack during this battle phase. During your end phase, each player takes 1,500 damage. You can only use this effect once per turn. So you burn both players for 1,500 at the end of the turn, and this card can attack twice. 3,000, 1,500, that's 4,500. You will usually win the game going second. Watch out for Book of Moon, watch out for Crackdown, watch out for Compulse. You can't play Forbidden Lance, you can't play MST. It's really hard. Don't worry about it. We are playing some Cubic cards that we're not going to actually summon just because we need different names. So Indiora Doomvolt, Dragni, Dark Garnex, Blade Garudia, and Gira Guile will basically just sit in your hand, and you can also discard them with Cubic Dharma. You can summon Gira Guile and Vulcan Dragni if you have Duza and Vijam out, and they kind of burn your opponent for 800, which could set up lethal. But you're not going to summon Dark Garnex, Blade Garudia, Buster Gundale, or Indiora basically ever because you don't have enough cards to sacrifice and it's not worth it. Duza, the Meteor Cubic Vessel, a level 4 light machine with 1,600 attack and 1,600 defense. If it's normal or special summon, you can send 1 Cubic card from your deck to the graveyard. That is not once per turn. Once per turn during either player's turn, if a monster was sent to your graveyard this turn while this card was face up on the field, you can make this card gain 200 attack for each monster with a different name in your graveyard until the end of the turn. So typically we will normal summon Duza to mill our copy of Cubic Karma so that we can search for Crimson Nova and go for lethal. Vijam, the Cubic Seed, cannot be destroyed by battle. At the end of the damage step, if this card battled an opponent's monster, you may choose to place this card as a face-up continuous spell card, and if you do, place 1 Cubic counter on that monster. Monsters with a Cubic counter cannot attack, also negate their effects. If this card is treated as a continuous spell by this effect, during your main phase, you can special summon this card from your spell and trap zone. So Vijam can't be destroyed by battle, which is really nice. It has 0 attack points, which means it's not affected by Yubel the Ultimate Nightmare. Yubel the Ultimate Nightmare cannot destroy monsters unless you burn them first. And since you take 0 damage, you don't get to destroy Vijam with Yubel. That means that Vijam is kind of like a hard card for Eternal Bond out. You should only activate Vijam's effect to negate a monster and put a Cubic counter on it if they have no other attacks for the rest of the turn. If they attacked with 1 monster and they only have 1 monster, or they attacked multiple times to try and get rid of your monster because they think it's only 1 time that it can be protected by battle, then yeah, sure, you can negate the last monster that attacks. But otherwise, just keep the monster up so that you can make sure you don't die. Cubic Dharma, you take no battle damage from attacks involving your Cubic monsters. That's really, really good. You can only use each of the following effects once per turn during your main phase. You can send 1 Cubic card from your hand to the graveyard, and if you do, draw a card. That's really strong. Mill whatever you need to. A lot of Cubic spells and traps have grave effects, and you can make sure you have different monster names in your hand for Crimson Nova and for Buster Gundle if you happen to be in a position to summon him. You can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one cubic monster in your graveyard and add it to your hand. So if you cubic Dharma and you discard your own cubic Dharma, you can still get benefit from that by banishing it to add a monster from your graveyard to your hand. This is also a great card to mill with Duza if the game goes on. So if you've already milled your cubic Karma and you draw another Duza, you can mill cubic Dharma and get your Crimson Nova back because it probably got destroyed. It's great. Cubic Karma, when this effect is activated, you can target one cubic monster you control except Vjam and send any number of Vjams from your hand or deck to the graveyard, then that monster gains 800 attack for each permanently. During your opponent's turn, if Vjam the Cubic Seed is special summoned by the effect of a cubic monster, send this card to the graveyard, and if you do, have your opponent's life points. That's not going to happen. You can banish this card from your graveyard, add one cubic monster from your deck to your hand. So, that is not once per turn. We're only playing one of it, though. The first effect is not great, but if you happen to open this card and you don't open your cubic Dharma to discard it, you can activate this card. You can target your Duza and then send Vjam to the graveyard. Duza becomes a 2400 attack point monster. Duza can mill another monster and then activate its own effects to give itself 400 attack points since there's two monsters with different names in the graveyard. So you have 2800 attack points. You can probably take at least some control of the board with that. So it's not a terrible turn one if you don't happen to have your Crimson Nova, and you probably won't since you open Cubic Karma. It's a backup. It's not a great backup. You could potentially play this card at 2 if you wanted to make sure that you didn't brick on it, but it's a pretty bad card to have in your hand. Cubic Ascension, when an opponent's monster declares an attack, special summon one Vjam the Cubic Seed from your deck, and if you do, change the attack target to it and perform damage calculation. So the trap card for Cubic Ascension forces damage calculation, which is very interesting. It means that your opponent basically can't, because it's part of a chain, your opponent cannot respond to the battle. You attack Vjam, the damage goes through, and then Vjam immediately gets the ability to neutralize the monster. And your opponent can't respond to that with a card like Firewall Dragon, for example, to bounce the monster. They're not allowed to because the battle was part of the trap, which is dumb, I understand, but, you know, Cubics need all the help they can get. If your opponent's life points are at least 2,000 higher than yours, you can banish this card from your graveyard to special summon Vjam the Cubic Seed from your hand, deck, or graveyard. Then if only your opponent controlled a monster when this effect was activated, you can special summon up to 2 more. You can only use this effect once per turn. So this is really good in the Cubic Seeds version, but we don't have Cubic Seeds here, so we only have 1 copy of Vjam. However, if your opponent plays Legend of Heroes, and it's your turn going second, they started with 6,000 life points, you can discard this card with the Cubic Dharma and then banish it to special summon 1 Vjam from your deck because your opponent has 2,000 more life points than you. Pretty nice. Cubic Causality, this is a great card. When it's activated upon resolution, distribute a number of cubic counters on face-up monsters your opponent controls up to the number of cubic monsters you control. Monsters with a cubic counter cannot attack, also negate their effects. So, this has its ups and downs. For example, if your opponent is playing Cosmo and they respond to the activation of Causality by banishing one of their monsters to special summon another monster, that effect resolves before Cubic Causality resolves. So their new Cosmo monster will enter the board as the last part of the chain, then Causality resolves and you can use that monster to get the neutralization instead of the opponent's monster that they banished. That's beneficial to you. However, your opponent can also respond to you activating this card by destroying your cubic monsters. And if they do, well, on resolution, you don't have any cubic monsters, so you get 0 counters. It's definitely an awkward card, but being able to permanently negate and shut off attacks for more than 1 monster is very good. You can use this during the battle phase. It's just one of your best cards. It's basically your only back row, so make sure that you use it. You can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one cubic monster you control. This turn, each time it destroys a monster by battle that has a cubic counter, inflict damage to your opponent equal to half the original attack of the destroyed monster. You can only use each effect once per turn. This is how Dimension Summoning worked in Dark Side of Dimensions. You got to summon your monster with full power without tributing, but if it was destroyed by battle, then you took damage equal to its attack points, and that damage is halved. Causality is a good card. You can send it to the graveyard with Duza and then banish it, and the nice thing is the cubic counters that you distribute with your skill count for this. So you can use Neutralization, neutralize one of your opponent's monsters without even putting a cubic counter on it from Vjam or Causality, and then summon your Crimson Nova, crash into your opponent's monster, and they will take burn damage, even though you didn't play a card to put the counter on there, which is really, really cool. Nice synergy. Cubic Mandala, if you control a cubic monster, activate this card by targeting any number of monsters that are in your opponent's graveyard because they were destroyed and sent there this turn. Special summon them to your opponent's field, but each monster's attack points become 0 and has 1 cubic counter placed on it. Monsters with a cubic counter cannot attack, also negate their effects. While your opponent controls any monster special summoned by this effect, negate any monster effects your opponent activates. That includes monsters that they summon after the fact. When the last of these monsters leaves the field, destroy this card. Okay, I'm coping really hard on this card. It's really bad. You have to basically destroy one of your opponent's monsters and then revive it to their field. It has 0 attack points. It's kind of like Shark Drake, but, I mean, is that beneficial to you? Primarily, this is good because, like, if your opponent has a wide board, then you can revive one of their monsters in attack position and crash into Crimson Nova with the second attack. They take 3,000, you pass, they take 1,500 more. Same thing with Buster Gundle, but it's not really going to happen. You have to, like, have this card and then pass to your opponent so that you can use it because it's a trap card, and then summon Crimson Nova, and then, like, Crimson Nova has to not be removed or anything. I've never done this. Like, I've never resolved this with this version of the deck, but it's nice to have cards that don't have the same names as all the other cards to make sure that you can activate your Crimson Nova. So I feel like this card is just a good card just because it's not the other cards. And you could just discard it with Dharma if you draw it. So, alright, let's take a look at the replay. Alright, so our opponent's going first. They normal summon the Magical Musket Starfire. We draw and we activate our skill. So, Magical Musket Starfire has an effect. During either player's turn, you can activate Magical Musket spells and traps from your hand. If a spell or trap is activated in this card's column, except during the damage step, you can special summon one level 4 or lower Magical Musket monster from your deck in defense position, except Starfire. So we reveal 3 cubic monsters, and then we place a counter on Starfire. Our opponent does not get to respond to this effect. If we were playing a card like Forbidden Chalice, for example, our opponent would be able to respond to that by activating a card like, for example, I don't know, Dancing Needle if there was an option in the graveyard or something like that. But they don't get the opportunity. There is no opportunity for them to respond. Their monster effect is negated. And because their monster effect is negated, they no longer have the option to activate any Magical Musket cards from their hand. Normal summon Duza, mill the Cubic Karma, banish it to draw the Crimson Nova, reveal 3, special summon the Crimson Nova, activate the Dharma, discard the Causality, banish Causality, attack, your opponent takes half, attack again, lethal. There you go. That is the power of being able to negate a monster's effect with a skill. It is ridiculously strong, and you will win the game in an instant when your opponent can't do anything. My name is Serafi, and I was thrilled to have all of you with me.